from the 2017 Southern Kentucky Festival of Books. I'm Barbara Deeb, and this is Outside the Book. We're so happy to start the series off with Debbie Dadey, who has a Kentucky connection and an extremely successful career as a children's author. So, Debbie, you went to Western. You're from Kentucky?
I grew up in Henderson, Kentucky. I went to Western Kentucky University for my undergraduate and my graduate. I was in the library and science school, and for my undergraduate, I was in elementary education.
Okay, so teacher, library science, and then one day while you're a teacher, an elementary school teacher, you had a bad day?
Yes, well, actually, it was when I was a librarian. I was writing, I was beginning to write with a friend of mine, Marcia Jones, and she teased me one day after a trying day that, you know, if I was some kind of monster teacher, all the kids would pay attention to me. And I said, well, I like that idea. I think we should write a story about it. And we did. We wrote a story called Vampires Don't Wear Polka Dots, which we were so fortunate, sold really well, and turned into a series. There's 51 numbered ones. There's super specials, holiday specials, 2 spin-off series. And we were blessed that this was with Scholastic, and they asked us to do several more series as well.
Well, so the Bailey School Kids, if you're familiar with that series, extremely popular. And then your newest, though, is The Mermaid Tales, number 16 in The Mermaid Tales.
Yes, this is with Simon & Schuster, and Simon & Schuster just contacted me out of the blue one day and said, would you be interested in writing a new series? And I like to write.
So wait a minute. Here, right? Writers out there, potential writers, those who want to be writers, you get a call from Simon & Schuster one day? Oh, yeah, good day.
Yeah, it was a good day. Actually, it was through my website. She contacted me and said, this is kind of strange, but what do you think about writing a new series? And so we went back and forth for 6 months trying to figure out what this new series should be about, and landed on mermaids and
How did you
adventurous.
land on mermaids? Because that's not, I don't know, where'd mermaids come from?
Well, my friend Marcia and I wrote a book called Mermaids Don't Run Track, and maybe I didn't get all the mermaid out of my system, because, well, they're fun to write about, and maybe I'm going through, you know, my girl cycle or my princess cycle, my mermaid fun. I don't know.
But you also turned me on to something, whether you knew this or not, that there are merboys.
Oh, yes.
Okay. So we don't discriminate.
No, it's a classroom underneath the sea. So not only do we have adventures and fun times in 3rd grade, but we also learn about a little bit about the ocean, because we interact with ocean creatures, and the lessons in the 3rd grade classroom center around different ocean creatures. This book happens to center on coral reefs, but some of the other books talk about different ocean creatures, whales, like a whale of a tail.
A whale of a tail.
Danger in the deep blue sea, sharks.
Okay, let's step back. So you write every day?
I do. Try to.
All right. And when you're writing for children, you have to come at it from a different POV, a point of view?
Well, when you have that 3rd grade mentality, it works really well.
I mean, I guess you almost have to, huh?
I guess I've never grown up. So it's fun. It's fun writing. I love writing about 2nd and 3rd grade. I have written some books for older kids, which I like history, so I've written some books for older kids, mostly centered on history. But I love writing fun, hopefully little humorous books.
So do you have somebody that you bounce it off of? Like, you know, I know you've got your editors and that kind of thing, but, you know, a youngin that you can turn to and say, is this what you would say as a 3rd grader? Do you have that?
Well, I do have 3 children, and my daughter was my biggest fan for a long time, and she even wrote the illustrator of the Bailey School Kids books, and he put her picture in some of the books, so that was really special. And my picture as well as in some of the books, so that was fun. But I do belong to a critique group and an organization called the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. And anybody wanting to write for children, I highly recommend they join that. It's scbwi.org.
So it's kind of a group of peers that can critique you honestly and constructively.
Right, and they have it's an international organization, and they have conferences and workshops all over the world. So it's really a great way to learn more.
You know, literacy is so important, and nabbing children at an early age is extremely important. Do you feel like you've done your part in that regard?
Well, one time I said to my husband, I feel like I'm not really making a difference because as a teacher, you see it right there. You can, when the child
It's
says to
instant,
you,
sort of, yes.
Miss Dadey, I can read, it's right there and it's so special. And it's a little different when you're a writer because you don't always see it. But then at activities like this, you'll have kids come up to you and adults come up to you and say, I read your book when I was a kid and it made all the difference in the world to me. That's really special.
That's huge.
Yeah.
That's huge. Okay, you started writing, I'm going to say decades ago, and you're still in the business. The world is a very different place than it was decades ago. So how do you adapt your writing style? You still want to grab kids. They're still kids, but their world has changed as well.
Well, my first book did come out 26 years ago. But you know what? I've been around various places around the world, and I found that even though times have changed and pressures on kids have changed, we still all want friends. We still all want our parents to love us. We still want to have a pet. Some things haven't changed, and I think those are the most important things.
Okay, before we let you get away, there's a mermaid song that goes along with the mermaid tales.
Oh, yes, I can show you.
She's
It's
going
in
to show us.
every
Are you going to
book.
sing it for us?
I wrote it.
Okay.
And I had a friend who put it to music. She could do a much better job singing it. But it starts out, let the water roar, deep down we're swimming along, twirling, swirling, singing the mermaid song.
Woohoo! What a way to get us going. We've been talking with children's author Debbie Dadey. Thank you and continued success.
Thank you, Barbara.
Outside the Book continues. I'm Barbara Deeb, joined now by Dennis Hetzel, who writes about baseball and politics. How much more American can we get?
Right. What's more American than baseball and dirty politics?
Well,
That's
okay,
kind of
dirty
our catchphrase.
politics. Yeah, let's talk dirty politics. But before we do that, you come from a journalism background.
I do.
You're at your core, you're a journalist.
Yeah, at heart, I was a reporter, an editor, a publisher, and a general manager, and now I've crossed over to the dark side. I'm actually a lobbyist. I run the Ohio News Media Association in Columbus, Ohio, representing our industry.
So in your free time, you write books?
Yeah, you kind of pick at it. I write a lot on weekends. I've written a lot on vacations. We have a home in Holden Beach, North Carolina, where we hope to retire someday. So I write in big chunks.
Okay, and that's interesting because part of the reason that we do Outside the Book is to kind of get inside the head of some of these writers. You'll hear from a lot of writers throughout these programs, write every day, write something every day. So you're more of a chunk writer. You write when you get the time.
I think a lot of it depends on your psychological makeup and what else is going on in your life. I'm kind of ADD. I think about writing every day.
Okay.
And then once I get started, I'm like obsessed, and I'll be up till 4 a.m. and burned out the next morning at my day job. So I tend to just write in very big chunks. I can outline, re-edit, rewrite in the evenings and stuff, but that's sort of my MO.
Well, and you say rewrite and do those kinds of things. Many writers that we've spoken with will put it aside for a while. Do you need that time to let it simmer, so to speak, and then come back to it?
It really depends. I've done so much editing and rewriting over the years that kind of comes easy for me, and I actually enjoy that. It's the blank page, especially if you're kind of stuck
Staring
on a plot
at you,
point
yes?
where you can get really slowed down, and you have to kind of work through that. And I learned in the first novel, because I've only done 2, and I know there's people here who have done like 50. Eventually you get an epiphany, when you have a bad spot in the plot, you can't figure out where you're going to go with the story or how to resolve some problem in the story that without being some ridiculous coincidence or something like that. And eventually it comes to you, usually when you least expect it. You might be in the shower, on the treadmill, and then you go, oh, that's how I'll resolve that.
Now, many authors start with a title and go from there. Others start with a character, an idea. Where do yours come from?
The 2 novels, which are both about sports and politics, and the new one, Season of Lies.
Dirty politics.
Dirty politics. Kind of follows the story that I started in the first book. the title of the first book, Killing the Curse, came easy because the whole premise was, what if there was a crazy fan that would do anything to make sure the Cubs won the World Series, and a lot more is involved. The title for the second book was agonizing. The publisher kept going, that's not good enough, that's not good enough, that's not good enough, and I'm resisting, being defensive, getting tired of thinking about it. It's what I used to do with reporters.
Yes.
When I was an editor.
I don't like being on the other side.
And then finally, I was proofreading the draft, and there was a sentence that about Luke Murphy, my president of the United States. He goes, Luke knew he was living a lie. And I went, season of lies. And it's just like the epiphany I was just talking about. So the title came very late. It originally was The Pitcher and the President, which sounded almost like youth fiction or something. So I think it's a great title, frankly.
Well, tell our audience, educate our audience, if you will, about writing a book. What we've learned along the way is you don't often get to choose your illustrators if you're using illustrations. And a lot of times you don't get to choose the title, that the publishing company may actually do that for you.
My publisher, Kathy Tietz at Headline Books, is very collaborative. We actually used a Northern Kentucky artist named Kevin Kelly, who also is a friend of mine, who's brilliant, for my cover art. And, Kathy gets the final say on the title, as she should. She's the one that's got to market the book. She's the one that's got all the upfront expense, in printing, delivery, the middlemen, et cetera, et cetera. So I get that, but it's very collaborative, and you just have a lot of back and forth and dialogue until she's happy. And, that's probably the way it should be.
What about marketing a book? You bring up a good point, because we consume books in very different ways these days, so it presents a bit of a challenge for an author.
Yeah, one thing, I've learned, it's the arts, and so if you end up having financial success with it, you have to look at it as a bonus and be very philosophical about it. It's just a cool thing that you've done, and you obviously hope you make a little money on it, because, there's an old saying, and we used to use this in my newsrooms, if you're, writing it for yourself, you only need to print one.
That's a good point.
So, you want people to like it, you want people to discover it and enjoy it. Otherwise, you could just write a memo to self. But, unless you're with a large New York publishing house, you're going to have to do a lot of your own feet on the street, social media, outreach and marketing, and you kind of hope it goes viral and becomes very popular at some point.
What's more important to you, your plot or your characters, or do they go hand in hand?
They do go hand in hand, but I didn't know this when I started. I have learned that I want to have a good plot, but I really want to have great, memorable characters, which is a little unusual for someone in sort of the thriller genre. But it really means a lot to me that the characters are memorable and nuanced and so on. So, yes to both, but having really well-written, rich characters might be a little more important.
And what's next for you? We've got Killing the Curse and Season of Lies. What's up?
Well, I took a little break, but I'm interested in starting writing again faster than I thought I would be, and I actually have some ideas for 3 more books with some of these characters.
Wow.
But they're not fully fleshed out. I really do want to do a backstory in the 1980s journalism world with one of my characters who's a Rush Limbaugh-like sports radio talk show host in Chicago. And I think there's some more I could do with him. That would be fun, and that would I could drill into some of my experiences.
Indeed, bad hair and shoulder pads from the anchor desk.
Yeah,
Indeed.
We all dressed like everybody in Spotlight.
I love it. I love it. Dennis Hetzel, continued success.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Outside the Book continues. I'm Barbara Deeb, joined now by Lee Pennington. We could probably take the whole interview time just going over what an amazing writer, poet you are. But let's just start with welcome. So
Thank you
happy
very
to
much.
have you here.
It's incredibly nice to be here today. Thank you.
Well, you're a Kentucky native.
I am indeed. It's what Happy Chandler said about people either on their way home to Kentucky or wanting to go home.
That's right.
Yeah.
That sense of place. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But you were named Poet Laureate of Kentucky in 1984. That was the same year that a man named Jesse Stewart died.
Yes,
And
yeah.
you have a fascinating story about Jesse Stewart. He's the one who kind of got you into writing.
Well, yes, he did. He and my high school English teacher, Lena Nevis, and I continued to give both of them credit. And then I had a 7th grade teacher, Bob Waddell, who got me interested in college. And up until then, I was going to be a sheep farmer.
Well, a sheep farmer?
Yeah.
And then strawberries. You have a fascinating story about making money in strawberries.
Yeah, my mother and father, Dad was a small hillside huckster that, raised farm goods and sold them in the town of Portsmouth, Ohio. And they always gave me a row of strawberries, and whatever was made on that row was mine to keep. And when I was a junior in high school, Jesse became principal of McHale High School.
Jesse
and
Stewart.
Jesse went over to the Portsmouth Times and said, "Why don't you let one of our high school students do articles?" And they said, "Have you got one?" Jesse said, "Yeah." And he came back over and he said, "You're our reporter." And anyway, I got $3 a game. And my first check, I came running down to Jesse's office, showing him my check, waving it around. And I said to Jesse that I made more money writing than I did raising strawberries, so I decided to be a writer.
Now, there's writing, and then there's writing poetry. And I suspect two very different worlds?
Well, yes and no. I had a very interesting experience, and it was connected to Jesse. Jesse, of course, wrote Man with a Bull-Tongue Plow, which I had a little paperback copy, and I carried it around all the time in my hip pocket and read it. And I decided that I wanted to be like Jesse. I wanted to publish me a book of poetry. Even came up with a title. I called it The Boy with the Silver Hoe. And anyway, Jesse had the reputation of having written poems on backs of poplar leaves, taking a needle and scratching out the poems on the back. And I didn't want to do that, but I wanted to do something like that so I could have that reputation. So back in those days, our fertilizer sacks were several layers of paper. And so I would tear up fertilizer sacks and write my poems on the fertilizer sacks. And I remember taking a bunch of them. Jesse had read some of my prose that my English teacher had passed along. And I remember taking a bunch of poems up to Jesse, still on the fertilizer sacks in my handwriting. Jesse was very kind. He took time to read them over, and he looked at me and he said, "I guess you better stick with prose."
Oh.
I've said ever since that's probably the reason whatever I've been able to do in poetry probably was a result of that statement.
Well, but along the way. And what's your newest book is?
The newest book is a book called Daughters of Leda. Leda, in the Greek mythology, was Zeus's lover, but she didn't mean to be. Zeus had to disguise himself as a swan, and Leda loved swans, and so that's how Zeus was able to get close to her as a mortal. But that's the latest.
That's the inspiration?
Yes. And
the cover art, if you take a look at this book, Daughters of Leda, you mentioned there's an interesting story related to that painting?
Yeah, that painting. This is a painting by my lady now, Jill Baker. And Jill illustrated a lot of my early books. And in about 1974, Jill was having an art show in the Parthenon in Nashville, and I went down for the show, and this painting was in it, and I wanted desperately to buy it, but I couldn't afford it. And so I bought a couple of small drawings that Jill did. And when Jill and I got together in 2011 after my late wife's death, first thing I said to Jill, "What happened to that painting?" And anyway, Jill said, "Well, my mother bought it, and I don't know what happened to it." Jill's sister was taking care of Jill's mother in her mother's final days, and Jill's sister wrote Jill and said, "Jill, I've got this painting of a nude in water, and it's in storage. Would you like it?" And we drove to Colorado and picked it up.
And got that painting. It was
so
meant to be.
I did finally get the painting, but I had to take Jill with it.
Well, not a bad deal.
Not a bad deal at all.
What do you think about in these modern times, in the year 2017, what role does poetry play?
Oh, poetry plays a major role, and it always has. we just, this year had one of our poets not recognized as a poet selected for the Nobel Prize for Literature, and poetry has in many ways with our music shifted to that particular genre, but poetry is still incredibly viable to us. In Kentucky, second only to basketball are people writing poetry. That sounds strange, but people play basketball in Kentucky. But second, and very close second, you can go up any holler or in any town or any city and open a dresser drawer and there'll be a poem or two in there that people are writing. So it's very viable to us, especially so in our late times, and very, very needed for us because it gives us a view of the world we can't find anyplace else.
And just very quickly, what makes a good poem in your opinion?
Well, I'm like Carl Sandburg. Carl Sandburg said, if he gets this pit in his stomach when he reads a poem, he knows it's a good poem. Now, I don't test it with my stomach. Don't have a good stomach, but I test it if the hair comes up on the back of my neck, either one of my poems or somebody else's poems. If I read that poem and then suddenly I feel this little crawly thing on the back of my neck, I say, that's one that's really, really working.
And just very quickly, last question. When you were named Poet Laureate of Kentucky, did that change your career?
It didn't change my career. It was a stunning sort of unexpected thing that happened. Jesse Stewart was Poet Laureate, and Jesse had just died recently. And my students campaigned, without my knowing it, to the state legislature, and in those days the state legislature selected the Poet Laureate, and so it was done politically and through the state legislature. And the first thing I knew, I got the bill and the comment that I'd been made a Poet Laureate of Kentucky.
Congratulations.
So incredible honor.
Well, it is, and well deserved.
Well, thank
We've
you.
been talking with poetic legend Lee Pennington. From the 2017 Southern Kentucky Festival of Books, I'm Barbara Deeb. It's Outside the Book. And as you can hear, the noise level is ramping up a little bit because, activities get underway, and we're so excited at WKU PBS to be able to bring you Outside the Book. And it's just like it says, we take you inside the author's brains. So one of our authors joining us right now, actually author-illustrator, is Gemma Carell. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I asked you, I said, which do you prefer, author or illustrator? But really, you do both.
Yes, yeah, I write and illustrate my own books.
And now what I learned along the way doing these interviews is that a lot of authors don't get to choose who illustrates their books, do they?
No, they don't, and that's partly why I like doing both, because it gives me a little bit more control, and most of my work is the combination of text and image, so it's important for me to have both together.
Are you an artist?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, an illustrator, yes.
Okay, so help me understand the distinction there.
I would say that an illustrator works more with narrative. So, for example, with books, with text and image together, whereas art, I think artists generally more work just from their imagination alone.
So really, you almost have to be duplicitous in the way you approach something.
Yeah. I come from, I often start out with the text rather than the image in mind, which I think is a different way to work.
The book, the newest one, the Feminist Activity Book. Okay, first of all, you're a young woman. It's 2017. What does that term mean, feminist?
Well, I mean, it means different things to everybody, but to me personally, it just means looking for equality between the sexes, and not just between the sexes, but between everybody. So there's the term intersectional feminism, which is equality of the sexes, and every race, every class, any person can be included in that. So it's not just male or female.
So how did you set out to do this? You thought, I want to get in on this intersection, and I want to tell this story.
Yeah, and I wanted to do it in the way that I know how, which is using a little bit of humor. You know, I'm not an academic feminist, so although I've used a lot of academic terms in there, I've explained them simply. I've tried to make them fun because there's a conception that feminists don't have a sense of humor. And, you know, I wanted to make it accessible to a lot of people.
So you bring up an interesting point. Preconceived notions and stereotyping or profiles of a feminist is that they don't have a sense of humor and they're not fun.
Right, exactly. And I don't think that's true at all.
So fun is important, which tells me that you want your reader to interact, to feel connected to what they're looking at.
Yeah, and I thought that an activity book was a good way to do that because it leaves a lot of scope for people to make their own mind up about certain things. There's a section, for example, on books where people can read and rate different feminist books. So I don't want to be prescriptive about telling people what is or isn't feminism.
That's interesting. So you're saying rather than taking a message and making sure they get that message, you want them to be able to draw their own conclusions.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think in any area of life, it's not good to be too rigid about your beliefs and forcing them on other people.
So what's next for you, or what are you working on right now?
So at the moment, I've done a lot of artwork about mental illness recently. I've been working with Mental Health America, making comics based on other people's experiences of mental illness. And now I'm going to actually start working on a graphic novel about mental illness, anxiety, and phobias.
That sounds fascinating.
Yeah, it's I mean it's part memoir, so it's based on some of my own experiences too. There's a lot of books out there about mental illness already, but I always try and approach things from my own angle. So, as with the feminist activity book, I'm looking for a different way of approaching it.
And a graphic novel.
Yeah.
Why would that be important when you're dealing with a subject as prickly, if you will, as mental illness? A graphic novel might be a good way to approach it.
Yeah, I think for me, imagery can say a lot that words can't. And although I do still use a lot of words, there's certain things that can't really be portrayed accurately because it's so difficult to put into words the things that you're feeling. And also because art helped me when I was younger and suffering from phobias and panic attacks. So I want to kind of reflect my own experiences and how I dealt with them through the actual book. Also, I want it to be accessible again to different age groups, and I feel like a graphic novel is good for younger readers too.
As well. Well, continued success.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for sharing your story.
Yeah, thank you.
We've been talking with illustrator, author Gemma Carell. From the 2017 Southern Kentucky Festival of Books, I'm Barbara Deeb. Thanks for joining us.